Alright, I'm gonna go ahead and get started here on this. So basically, what I'm going to do is I make these stencil jigs, um, kind of like this. This is the one from Wireshark, and I make these so that I can easily just 3D print one of these, and then I'll put my board in, and I'll put my stencil on top of it. Makes it a lot easier to apply solder paste using a stencil, um, since I can print it to the appropriate height, and I can make this perfectly fit whatever board that's going to go in it. Sandabout's a little more complicated though than normal. You have a lot of empty areas, like the space between the legs and the space between the arms and the body, and we don't. I don't normally like to produce jigs that complicated because it's just that other than it just takes longer to print. It's just more complicated and ends up making it more difficult to remove the board from it. But I've talked about this enough times that I wanted to do a demo of how I do that. And since this is a relatively complicated board, it'll cover a lot of things, a lot of like best practices and things like that I've learned um, over the dozen and a half so version of these. Um, so first off, I design most of my boards in Inkscape as far as the art's concerned, which means I do my edge cut in Inkscape. So, which is what this is. So we're gonna go ahead and just start with this, and so I'm gonna copy that into a new document and paste it in there. And I don't actually know exactly how large the stencil I'm getting is. PCB is sponsoring this board, and which, if you're not familiar with my Christmas ornaments, for the past few years, I've made a Christmas ornament of some kind. The last 3 years has been a printed circuit board, and I I produced the boards, and coincidentally, all 3 years, or well, no, last year JLC PCB produced a 4-layer board for me, but it wasn't sponsored. We paid for that out of pocket, and then um, the rest of it, and then the year before that was PCB Way. But this year is PCB Way again, but they're actually sponsoring it, um, and the money goes to the Child's Play charity. So I think it was like about $1,000 last year. I only produced about 43 boards, I believe. This year I'm trying to do 100 boards. Um, so hopefully we'll sell out. We sold out in like 2 days last year. Um, because of how late Thanksgiving was this year, I kind of got a later start than I'm into. Um, but normally what I would do is I would have the stencil in hand and I would know exactly how big it was going to be. So I would create a shape that's about usually a couple centimeters bigger than whatever the stencil size is. Given how big this is, it's a 55 by 95. Um, it'll probably be probably 100 by 113 is my guess. So that's what I'm just gonna make this sample. And let me remove the stroke from this. Um, so I'm gonna make this 100 by 113, 130. It'll probably be different, and that's okay if it is. I can come in here and redo this pretty quickly. So first I'm gonna align all these to the center of the page, and then what you do is you need to make, in my case, if I print this exactly as it is, the exact same size, your tolerance will be too tight and you won't be able to easily put the board in and remove it. So what I always do is I always give it like an extra half a millimeter in thick in width overall, which is about 25 like a quarter a millimeter more on all four sides altogether. Um, so what you do is with your outline is you give it a stroke, and I only need this to be half a millimeter. And then once you have the stroke, you're going to go path, stroke to path, and then you're going to path, break it apart. And you're going to take the smaller part, which is this one. So if you hide this one, it gets a little bigger. And we're going to get rid of that. We don't need that. This is the part we're going to base everything on now. So to simplify this, I'm going to come in here and I'm actually going to do a little more than even I normally would because you have a lot of like really complicated shapes in this. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come in here and edit the nodes, and I'm going to delete these nodes, and I come over here, I'm going to straighten this out, and then I'm going to do something pretty similar here, except I'm going to go ahead and add an extra node right there, and I'm going to delete those nodes, select these two, and do a straighten on those. And it's obviously not exactly straight, but we don't need it to be. We just need it to be smaller than it was before. So I can even come down here and just, well, let me I'm gonna delete that, and I'm gonna straighten this again. There we go. That way I guaranteed am coming in under this part, because this is the part we want to come out so that when we're putting the board in, we're not scraping against plastic. So come in and delete those nodes. Come in, straighten them. And now you notice that you could probably tell that it's like now you've got a much simpler overall shape. And I'm actually going to come in and even simplify this even a little bit more, because I would really like, so these little areas right here, they print fine, but sometimes depending on the edge of the board, it might not pop in and out very friendly. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I think these are pretty close in size. So I'm going to go ahead and clear this out. Select this and straighten them out. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. Straighten them out. And all we're really doing is we're making it so that when we're putting the board into this jig, it snaps in and out really easily. And I'll probably go ahead and do the same thing right here too. Just like that. Straighten this. Straighten this. Whoop. All right. And so now we have, I figured it doesn't really look like it used to, but if we put it on top here, whoop, we don't want to do this by nodes. You can see how this would actually fit inside. Now, I'm going to do one more thing. This is actually a tip I got from another Badge Life badge maker, MST Squared. He did the jigsaw badges. Or he actually adds like a little divot so that he can easily, with a finger, pull out the board without having to like flex the jig or anything like that. I normally just flex the jig. That hasn't been a problem for me, especially if I do my tolerance correctly. But it actually would be pretty nice to just go ahead and be able to easily remove it. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a shape. And let's, I'm going to remove the stroke because we don't need the stroke. and I am going to just make this black, just to make it easier to see. And we don't need that. And I'm just going to go ahead and just center this on the page. And I want to make this a particular size. I want to make it about 1 inch, but I'm not 100 to, let's see, 1 inch to a millimeter, because I don't know what an inch is in millimeters off the top of my head. It's about 25 millimeters. So this is about twice that. So let's just make it 25. And now we're going to have this little tab we can easily pull off. That's actually a lot bigger than I was thinking. So let me do about, let me do about 18 instead. There we go. Because I still want the feet to be able to pop in and out. So whoop. All right, and I'll position it like that. All right, and then what you do is once you have the general shape you want, which that's what it's going to look like with the board in, and then inside the jig. I'm going to go ahead and combine these two shapes. Do a path union because I want the nodes to come over. And then I'm going to do, now what I need to do is, assuming this is the right size, what you would normally do is you would just do a difference and take it out, and but I'm not going to do that just yet. I'm actually going to go ahead and I say this as a outline negative space, and let's see, bottom jig, and I'm going to go ahead and save this as a kind of like a raw format stencil. That way, if I need to come back and make major changes, I can, and it's no big deal. So I'm going to go ahead and save as, and we'll dump that. Let's see. I always save everything as raw when I need to come back and edit it later. So now let's go ahead and move on. So now you got to create the negative space. So the way you do that is you select the two objects, you do a path, and you do a difference. And now you get this nice cutout. And this is really what we really want. So now with a cutout, I use Tinkercad for the next step. And so to prep it for that, you need to add some nodes to it so that the more nodes there is, the more detail there is when you import it into Tinkercad. So there's not a whole lot of nodes in this right now. There are now. Let me and this isn't like if you see me do SVG engine where you add like an insane number of nodes because those are line segments. You don't need to go like that high. You just need a lot more for a lot more detail. So this is enough. So you add your nodes, and then you save your stencil. And actually, I need to remove this outline. And I'm actually going to make the document the same size as the stencil overall. So we'll resize that. We'll save it. And now we will, now that's saved, we can go into Tinkercad and finish working on the jig. Now, you might ask, well, how come I don't use something like Fusion 360 or something like that? And you definitely can use Fusion 360 to do this. In fact, I used to do it in Fusion 360. The reality is that I don't use Fusion 360 often enough to really stay on top of how to use it. Like I just can't. I always have to reteach myself how to use it every time I open it. And this really only takes me a couple minutes to do normally in Tinkercad, so it's really frustrating to have to like reteach yourself or program every time because I don't use it for much else. Although I really could use it for a lot of things, but that's just not my. It's just not part of my workflow right now. But when you import it into Tinkercad, you just select the SVG, and the dimensions should read what you made it. You do an import, and depending on how complex the jig is, it comes in pretty quickly like this, or sometimes it can take a little while. But as you can see, it preserved our edges. Um, it it's a little blocky, so it's not as good as I normally would like it. So actually, what I'm going to do is, in this case, I'm going to delete this, and I'm going to come in and add more nodes to this. So I'm going to undo my nodes. And because I don't want to have too many. Okay, that's a little better, but I think I want the spacing to be a little more. So I should just go back to the 2 like I had it the first time. But helps view. I have the object selected. Okay, that's okay. I guess I was just zoomed in too much before. Um, Now we'll re-import it again. This kind of looks like a spaceship now. That's kind of funny. I'm going to just change this to red just for the jig. But now you can see there's not a lot of sharp edges or anything like that. I mean, as far as like other than ones we want to be there, like it's pretty high poly count. Um, so now all we have to do is just reduce the height to be what we want it to be, and you want it to match the height of your PCB. So if you're doing a 0.6 millimeter jig, you would make it 1.6. I have been doing my boards in 1.2 millimeter lately, so I'm gonna make this 1.2 millimeter. And now that's pretty much it. That's the whole jig. You can definitely make this more complex and add some features. Like I could add like a raised edge on this part for the stencil to like slide against, and then that would give you a little better leverage when you're lifting it up and down. Um, Things like that you can definitely do. I've not honestly bothered to do any of that because generally speaking, once I get the stencil in place, I use it for up to 200 boards, 250 at the absolute highest, and then I'm kind of done with it. I don't really need to do any more. So for the and I usually don't even do that many. It's usually like closer to 150. So for 150 boards, a little aluminum tape because it doesn't stretch, and it's really sticky. Plus a stencil, and this jig right here, and it works great. I've never had problems. So um, so you can export it as an STL um, and save it. And I do all my 3D printing on a Prusa i3 Mark III, and I use Simplify 3D to do all that. So we just bring it in, and it's the correct size. We can even double check. 125. Those are the offsets. 100 by 130, 101.2 millimeter height, and that's it. That's our jig. And on my printer, it only takes about an hour to print these. Um, and I typically print them. Um, like generally speaking, my workflow is the day I get the boards, I come home, I come upstairs, I do this real quick, I design this, and I print it. And then by the time I'm done with dinner, making dinner for my family, and have done have time to come back to my office and continue working. The jig is printed out, it's ready to go. It only takes me a couple seconds to align it and get it set up. So that's the whole process. If you and generally speaking, if you can get jigs that are pretty small, most 3D printers can accommodate this. It's not until you get to like really large panels and things like that that this kind of method doesn't really work well for 3D printing. Though you could like split it up into multiple pieces, but that's kind of just a pain. And also, generally speaking, if you're using a whole panel, generally you can put it's a lot easier to align the stencil with a panel at the same time, so it's not too bad. But for but for small runs and for individual boards like this, it's really great. And I do this for basically all of my PCBs. Um, that's how I do it. If you have any questions, just hit me up on Twitter at Mr. Twinkle Twink. Um, and thanks again to PCBWay for sponsoring the board and the stencil. And last I checked, it's about halfway in production. Let's see, I'll do a quick just status update. As of December 2nd, Eastern Standard Time, United States, it's about 52% way through, which is great. So with a little luck, maybe I'll have them by Friday, and I can get these up by next Monday on Tindy. We'll see. But thanks for watching. Again, if you have any questions, just hit me up on Twitter. And thanks again to PCBWay. Have a good day.